is Eric Steinhardt, and this is a short little video on Nietzsche and how things can turn out badly, mainly based on the Will to Power book. This is primarily for my Philosophy 4040 class, and I'm making this little video because we have a snow day. So let's start with Will to Power section 955. I quote, "To view the contemporary European makes me very hopeful. An audacious ruling race is developing on the basis of an extremely intelligent herd mass. It will not be long before the movement for the cultivation of the latter will no longer have the foreground all to itself." End of quote. Okay, an audacious ruling race. Now, he can't mean a race in the sense that we often think of races as based on skin color or origin, like Asian or African or Caucasian or something like that, because he's talking about Europeans. I mean, everybody in this intelligent herd mass and the audacious ruling race is European. So they are primarily Caucasians. So, nevertheless, you can see how this could be very badly misinterpreted. We know that things in Germany are going to go very badly wrong after Nietzsche, not too long after Nietzsche, right? The Nazis will come to power, and they will have doctrines of racial superiority, doctrines that are false, but they will claim some inspiration from Nietzsche, although they will actually quickly just reject Nietzsche because Nietzsche says too many other things that are not consistent with Nazi racial ideology. Nevertheless, there's stuff in Nietzsche that can be misunderstood, too easily misunderstood, and there's material in Nietzsche that sometimes is pretty dark and pretty difficult. Right? Nietzsche is not all sunshine and butterflies. Nietzsche recognizes that there are just terrible and horrible aspects, not just of human life, but of life itself. Right? The survival of the fittest, or the war of all against all, the struggle for existence. And this is an issue. Nietzsche doesn't sugarcoat it, and he doesn't think that there's a God that's going to save you from the horrors and terrors of existence, or save society from the horrors and terrors of existence. But let's go on. So, Will to Power, section 956, quote, "The same condition that hastens the evolution of the herd animal also hastens the evolution of the leader animal," end quote. Okay, look, that's obviously easy to misinterpret according to a Nazi ideology. And in Nietzsche's defense, all that can really be said here is this is a quote that appears in a notebook that he never intended for publication. These were notes. Nietzsche, in fact, ordered all his notes to be destroyed. And notes are just that. We don't know where Nietzsche would have gone with this. It certainly by itself doesn't support any kind of fascist ideology. We know that Nietzsche was generally opposed to fascism. He was certainly opposed to anti-Semitism. Nevertheless, there it is, and when folks like Nietzsche's sister got a hold of it, they could run with this. Let's go on to 957. "Inexorably," I quote, "inexorably, hesitantly, terrible as fate, the great task in question is approaching. How shall the earth as a whole be governed? And to what end shall man as a whole, and no longer as a people, a race, be raised and trained?" End quote. Okay, that's a good question. What is humanity doing on this earth? What are we doing with ourselves? And if humanity isn't heading inexorably towards the second coming of Jesus, right, the heaven on earth brought to us by God, right, if Christianity isn't true and there is no God and there is no Jesus who's going to return in glory to save us from ourselves and to lock Satan up in the pit of hell, and so that only earth will be populated with only good and virtuous people, it'll be a new Eden, a paradise. If that's not going to happen, what is going to happen? And there's no God to decide what's going to happen. It's up to us. So he says that, I want to quote this, he says, "Humanity as a whole, and no longer as a people, a race." Okay, so he's talking about the species as a whole, and things that we ordinarily think of as races today, again, right, Asians, Caucasians, Africans, they're just not what he has in mind here. But it goes on. He's talking about the kind of morality you would need for answering this question about what humanity is going to do. And I quote, a morality which desires to train people for the heights, not for comfort and mediocrity. A morality with the intention of training a ruling caste, the future masters of the earth, must, if it is to be taught, appear in association with prevailing moral laws, the guise of their terms and forms. And he talks about doing this, I'll quote, for the rearing of a new kind of human, end quote. Let me quote again. He says, a new master type and caste, end quote. Okay, again, you can see how this could be very easily misinterpreted, right? This looks like it could go, without careful reading, into something like Nazi ideology. And Nietzsche's sister, again, took this and ran with this. She was wrong, but then again, it's not very clear what Nietzsche's getting at here. Again, in his defense, all that can be said is that these are notes never intended for publication, but still, he could have published them. So there could be some dark stuff here, but Nietzsche is dealing with dark questions. Let's continue with this section. Another quote from a little later in the section. To prepare this is quote, prepare a reversal of values for a strong kind of man of the highest spirituality and strength of will, and to keep this end slowly and cautiously, to unfetter a host of instincts now kept in check and calumniated. Whoever reflects on this becomes one of us, the free spirits, end quote. Right. There's a lot of dark stuff in humanity, and moving towards the superhuman is going to unleash a lot of very dark powers that have been kept in check by Christianity. Nietzsche doesn't like Christianity. He wants Christianity to be over, but it's dangerous. We are in a very dangerous situation. Let's continue. 995. Right, section 995. And he says, okay, this is quote, how do men attain great strength in a great task? All the virtues and efficiency of body and soul are acquired laboriously, little by little, through much industry and self-constraint, through much obstinate, faithful repetition of the same labors, the same renunciations, end quote. All right, he goes on to talk about this long, slow process, and then he says this, quote, in the end there appears a man, a monster of energy, who demands a monster of a task, end quote. Well, you can see somebody could easily misinterpret that as someone like Hitler, a tyrant, right? That is not what Nietzsche means here. And Nietzsche is very clear that he's talking about values. I'll just quote from 999, which is right on the next page. He who determines values and directs the will of millennia by giving direction to the highest natures is the highest man. There are questions of values here, and that's the end quote. There are questions of values here and questions of morality here. Right? What kind of morality are we going to have? And old moralities, human moralities, don't simply vanish, but they have to be surpassed. They have to be incorporated into new moralities. Let's start to finish this up with 960, section 960. He talks about, again, this sort of evolution of the superhuman. I'm going to quote, for the production of international racial unions whose task will be to rear a master race, the future masters of the earth, end quote. Okay, there you have that phrase, a master race, which of course the Nazis used. But the Nazis couldn't really use this because Nietzsche's saying the production of international racial unions. Okay, international racial unions is going to include people from all races, right? The so-called master race isn't going to be the fantasy of the Nazi Aryan race, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed German European, right? International racial unions. Nietzsche's very clear that then that's going to be, just massive kinds of human interbreeding. And that's the only way that one could start to evolve a superior type of human. And then the superhuman, the transhuman, what goes beyond human. But it's still problematic. I mean, what do words like superior mean here? What do words like higher mean here? Right? Nietzsche's not a racist, but Nietzsche is caught up in 19th century doctrines of biology and race that he couldn't know were false, but we can know were false, and we have to criticize him when he makes mistakes. And we also have to be very much aware that he wrote stuff that's easily misinterpreted, and that's not good, right? And he wasn't himself very clear about the kinds of values that he wanted, right? He drifts off into metaphors about mountain heights and the sunshine and colder, brighter air. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't tell you how you're supposed to run your life or how a society should be organized. So there are very difficult and dark questions in Nietzsche interpretation. And it is important to realize he can go badly wrong, he can be misinterpreted, and we need to be careful. Thanks.